Thanks, Robbie. And thank you, Congressman John Curtis, for spending some time with us today. Uh, just a quick few comments of introduction for the audience. Congressman Curtis comes to us from the Utah 3rd District. He's been in the National Congress since 2017 when he replaced a guy named Jason Chaffetz that you might have heard of. He started out life as a small businessman, but had two very successful tours. We call them tours, sir, of as the mayor of Provo, which I think catapulted him onto the national scene. He's a family man. He and his wife Sue have 6 children and 7 grandchildren, and most recently has become a member of the Republican China Task Force. And it's in that capacity that he joins us today to offer some observations and take a few questions. So thank you, sir, for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you to all of you. I might just mention they're voting now, and at some point you're going to see somebody walk in that door and come grab me by the collar, but we're going to take full advantage of the time until they do that.
Well, thanks, sir. Appreciate that heads up, and we'll get into it therefore, and hopefully we can have you for at least most of the period. What I didn't mention about the congressman's background is that uniquely, I think amongst Americans, he spent 2 years in Chinese culture and speaks some level of Mandarin Chinese. And sir, sort of spinning off that personal experience for the first question, what is your overall view as it currently exists with regard to the U.S.-Chinese relationship? Just a few bullets, if you will.
Well, it's not healthy. I think that's just very, very clear. And if it's not clear to Americans, we need to do a better job of articulating that. It's a relationship we need to be healthy. We need a strong relationship with China. We need to get this corrected and get on course. We can't ignore the fact that they're such a dominant force in the world. But right now, it's a relationship on life support.
Okay, good. Sir, not all Republican congressmen have chosen to join the China Task Force. Can you tell us what prompted you to think that it was something you wanted to do?
Well, to be frank, it's a real honor. There are only 15 of us, and it was by invitation. Kevin McCarthy invited us to be on it. And I think most who are not on it actually have a little bit of envy. It's been a great experience. For a number of months, we've held as many as 3 or 4 or more briefings per week, some of them classified, and have gone really deep down into the weeds on this issue.
Okay, well, perhaps because it is somewhat operating in a classified vein, I don't think the American public knows a lot about it at this point. Can you share with us some of the objectives that the task force has in mind?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think not only American people, but many members of Congress don't understand all the working pieces here. And I would just say overall, this is a relationship which decades ago, we decided we wanted to help bring China up to a standard, a higher standard. And we made concessions towards that, as we have with many countries. And we did it with the assumption that they would move to better human rights and to more freedom. And that's been done. That model worked in Taiwan. It's worked in many places around the world. And unfortunately, we find ourselves today in a situation where human rights abuses are actually worse. Freedom is worse than it was when we started this. And then China has not responded the way that we would have hoped that they would respond.
Well, I agree with you, sir. And it's got us in a quandary with regard to where to from here. It's interesting that at this point, it is the Republican China Task Force, not the congressional. I realize we're in the silly season, but do you see bipartisan support, or you see the other side joining you post-election?
Well, you're very insightful. We must make it bipartisan. We will fail if we don't make it bipartisan. When the recommendation comes out, we're just a few days away. You'll see many Democrats' bills recommended in that. We've tried very hard to make this a bipartisan effort. And I think even in our findings, we've tried to stay away from a political pandering or taking a grandstanding. And like I say, you'll actually see bills that have been entered by Democrats that we're going to recommend. And I'm hoping that they'll come and join us. We get past the silly season. We really need them to be part of this effort.
Well, that's a great response, sir, and I hope you're right. I mean, I think it's the only way that we ultimately succeed. Sir, you lived aboard in the Chinese orbit, and you know there's something to be said for a whole of nation approach, but China sort of takes it to the next level. How do you see that whole of nation approach when it comes to competition with Western business and Western society?
We're really starting at a disadvantage. Imagine a corporation who had every agency on their board, who could waive any regulation that they wanted to waive, who could avoid taxation, who if they needed more money, could just open up a faucet. And that's what we're competing with. And because we're better, we usually beat them, but we start at a disadvantage, and we can't assume that we'll always be able to prevail.
Roger. Sir, you mentioned the classified nature of what you're doing, and I don't want to get you in trouble, but are there any observations you can share with us that have maybe been eye-opening or surprising to you as a result of your collective efforts?
You know, this is certainly not classified, but I think it's very important when we have any discussion about China to differentiate between the Chinese people and the communist Chinese leadership. I love the Chinese people. They're great people. I love the Chinese culture. You mentioned I've spent time over there and speak Mandarin, and these are great people. And I want to make sure that we don't do anything that would indicate we have any problem with them at all. But their leadership is not. Their leadership is authoritarian. It's repressive, and seeks to take away freedom. And I think that's the kind of the aha moment here. I think for us that have been involved is, you know what, we don't have friends in their leadership right now, and we can't take that lightly.
Sir, you mentioned something that I think we see the president wrestling with today, and that is how do you walk that balance beam? I mean, on the one hand, you know, I think we cannot continue to accept some of the things that you've described. On the other hand, you don't want to crash and burn a relationship. So it's a balance beam that I think we have to walk as a nation, arguably as a world. But what are going to be your recommendations to him in terms of how he negotiates that potential minefield?
Well, I personally, I don't want to be too political, but I personally believe it takes a Trump personality to deal with China. I was very critical, to be honest, of President Trump early on with the tariffs, but he saw something I couldn't see, right? And he knew we had to rip this Band-Aid off, that we were too dependent on this trade relationship that was so one-sided, and that we've been taking advantage of for so long. And so I think as we deal with China, we've got to remember that the ultimate end is a good relationship. This is not about severing a relationship and pretending that we can get along. It's not a divorce, let's put it that way, right? It's mending a relationship, and it's putting things in place that make sure we're not taken advantage of in this relationship, that it's an equal relationship with partners, with fair competition. And I'll take competition all day long. And if we get beat, we get beat. But you can't put us at such a huge disadvantage. You can't ask our corporations to hand over their technology. You can't, right? I mean, you can't. It's got to be a different relationship than we've enjoyed.
I like that answer, and I have a follow-on question, sir. Again, going back to your experiences in the Chinese culture. When I visited there in 2009, the senior officer in the embassy told us that the Chinese will talk win-win, but they don't necessarily believe it. What you just described, I think most of us could, you know, accept as a win-win relationship and the way to go. But do you have optimism that we can get them there?
So they actually have terminology for a win-win relationship that you could translate as we win, you lose, right? And that's their definition of a win-win relationship.
Interesting.
And as Americans, we truly seek after that win-win. And you can look at our relationship with many countries around the globe where it has been win-win. As we've lifted them, as we've worked with them, it has benefited us. And we've operated under that assumption for way too long that China truly was seeking a win-win relationship. And the reality, again, and here again, I'm talking about their leadership, not the Chinese people. They don't want a win-win. They want a China wins and dominates the rest of the world and the United States.
I fear you're right, and that makes it sort of a scary proposition. Sir, to the topic that we're dealing with today, and that's the future transportation systems. The Chinese, I think, very wisely have stolen a march on us, realizing they can't compete with the combustion engine, but they can certainly compete with the electrical vehicles, and in many ways it facilitates their society. What are your thoughts on what we see them doing, and is it so far gone that we're going to have a very difficult time catching up and competing in that arena?
Well, we are behind, but I truly believe we can not only catch up, but we can dominate. If we unleash American ingenuity and creativity, if we don't overregulate or overtax, and that's what we have to be careful of. We've got to remember, who we're competing with. And our industries that are burgeoning and our car manufacturers, we've just got to be really careful that we don't put a situation together that causes them to fail, because this is an area where it's not acceptable to fail. But think about for a minute if the Chinese had been the first to develop the internet, and we had to live by their rules on the internet, and that's what we're facing here. If the Chinese do dominate this marketplace, and we're now adapting to their standards and their rules, it's not a place we want to be in as a United States. And fortunately, we've got great minds, we've got great companies, we've got great resources behind it, and we just need to make sure that we take off the ball and chain and let them go.
That's a great transition to the next question, Congressman. I mean, a lot of these minerals that are going to be required are out west. And I'd be curious how you see government endorsement of what must be done. Is it best at the federal level, the state, or the local level? How do you see us trying to get on this catch-up mode and enhancing our own future with the transportation systems?
Well, I think you mentioned the critical minerals, and I would refer to a bill we call HR 7061 that helps us catch up. Right now, we have many of these critical minerals. We're just not accessing them. Somehow we rationalized in our mind it's okay for them to rape and pillage the environment, and then we'll use those. But it's not okay for us to carefully mine these right here in the United States with good standards and safety standards and environmental standards and use those. And we've got to do some right sizing on that. I would also mention another category would be the 5G technology and spectrum. And we've got to get our act together in that as well, and make sure that the U.S. is not inhibited by lack of spectrum or that we're overregulating 5G and not letting them be successful with 5G.
We have such a federal system that invests powers in the states. And of course, everyone's concerned about the safety of advanced vehicles and EVs and those manner of things. Do you think that in some cases that we can be our own worst enemy with overregulation? And if you do sense that, how do we sort of implement a national policy or national strategy that will allow progress?
Yes, I do think we make a mistake here. As a former mayor, let me just tell you that if I accepted $1 of federal money on a road project, but my project increased in cost by 30% because of duplicative regulations, not regulations that were a problem if I didn't do, like safety or environment, but they were duplicative, and it increased the cost of a project. We talk about an infrastructure bill here in the United States. I could reduce the cost of infrastructure by 30% in an instant simply by letting states regulate and not the federal government on that one thing alone. And so, yes, you see, we do have a problem here, and we do have a habitual desire to overregulate here from DC. And that's not to say we should avoid safety regulation and environmental regulation. It's just simply to say that regulations that duplicate, that are meant to keep people from getting out of the gate to begin with, we've got to take a really hard look at those.
Sir, is that a legislative function of the Congress, or is that the Department of Transportation, or how do we get there?
I'm smiling because everything about Washington, D.C., whether it's legislative or administrative, wants to regulate, wants to be bigger, wants to control. I'll tell you, as a mayor, Mayors can do things better than states, and states can do things better than the federal government. Now, there are notable exceptions to that. And sometimes, right, we need regulations that span state lines. And so it's not an all-inclusive thing. But generally speaking, our most powerful work is done by local government.
Sir, I don't know if you heard previous conversation on this teleconference or not, but previous speakers have really emphasized the incredible importance of the automotive industry to our nation and to the economy. It seems that we are at somewhat of an inflection point. I mean, we're going to have gas vehicles for a long, long time to come. But at the same time, this whole concept of EV and AVs is out there more and more. Do you see a need sort of at the congressional level to dedicate some thought to the future success of this industry and to the jobs and the criticality to the economy that it provides?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. We have a role to play here. Some of that role is getting out of the way, and some of that role is incentivizing. And some of that role is, quite frankly, regulation. We just have to be careful with that. But we need to do our part here as well as everybody else who has a role in the success of this. Okay,
great. You said everyone else, and that leads me to think external to our own borders. I think in a lot of cases, our partners and allies, our friends across the globe see it the same way. Is it the intent of the task force to reach out to some of those nations and see if we can find common cause?
It is, and I've been pleased. We've had briefings from other countries as part of this task force, and the message seems to be we're getting it. We may not have got it to begin with, but we're starting to get it. COVID had a lot to do with that. COVID opened a lot of people's eyes as to the real intentions of China, and it scared a lot of countries. And I think it's helped our allies rally with us and realize that they need to work with us on this. Ultimately, we need them to be successful. And one quick example is our trading relationships with other countries. As you know, the new NAFTA, heavy emphasis was the automobile industry and getting that correct. And a healthy trading relationship with Canada and Mexico is paramount to us being able to put China in the right place as far as our trade relationship. A healthy relationship with the European Union and our other great allies around the globe is really very critical. And to make sure that they're on the same page as we are with right-sizing our relationship with China is very, very important.
Great. Do you see that hopefully in the future the bipartisan task force would reach out, or is that a State Department function? Or
I'm smiling.
I understand how that works, sir. Thanks for your time. Great responses. Very prompt and precise responses. Great to have you as part of the program.
Well, you know the drill. The first one is she comes in about that far, and in about 2.5 minutes, she comes in.
We don't want to see you get grabbed by the nape of the neck. So
if it wasn't a vote, I would ignore. But because it's a vote, I truly need to run. Thank you for letting me be with you today. Hope everything goes well for all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks. Bye-bye.